the 5 different types of sacrifices that one can bring? Who said it? Olah. And what is the olah? Burnt offering. And is the olah burnt offering, is it required? No. Free will. Free will offering. And it's burnt up on the altar. Okay? All of it goes up in smoke. And what kind of animal can the olah be? What do we say? What do we say? Well, here's what we have. A bull, a ram, or a male bird, dove, or young pigeon. Okay? So those are the kinds of different types of offerings you can bring for an olah.
All male.
All male.
Bull, ram. That's very specific.
Yes. All male. Okay? What's the next offering?
Wave offering, grain offering. Grain offerings, wave offering.
Grain offering. Here's where the KJV, somebody mentioned this last week, the KJV used to
There's
call
also
this
a
the
meat offering. The peace, that's one.
It's like they call it a meat offering. It's like there's no meat in this. It's all grain. It's down to us. The old English meat could mean grains. Right. This is where the archaic language sometimes I think is a little, which is why I think the new KJV helps us here. However, so it's a mincha, Hebrew mincha, grain offering. Is this offering mandatory or voluntary?
Voluntary.
Voluntary. And here's what it said, here's what we're told. It can be grain, fine flour, olive oil, incense, salt, no yeast or honey. Okay, and it's often accompanied by a burnt offering. Okay, often accompanied by a burnt offering. What's the third offering? Anybody remember? Shalomim. Shalomim, built off the word shalom, peace offering. Is this offering mandatory or voluntary?
Voluntary.
Voluntary. Okay, voluntary. And here's what we know about that one. Here, it's any animal without defect from herd or flock. I say any animal, it has to be one that can be sacrificed, that's in the category of those animals that can be sacrificed, that we've already discussed. And we'll talk about some of those in just a moment. What's the next offering? So we've had the olah, whole burnt offering, the mincha, the grain offering, the shalomim, the peace offering. What's the fourth? Katat. Now here's the katat splits. The katat is a split in this regard. We can translate it sin, a sin offering, or we can translate it a purification offering, depending on the context. Okay? And we've said that sometimes a person can become impure. That means they do not have the ability to go into the tabernacle or the temple because they have death about them. They have touched death. They can't go into the presence of the living God with death about them. So they become impure, only in relationship to the tabernacle and later the temple. So they must bring a katat offering. Remember the text in 1 Corinthians we talked about. Here's again one of those translation issues, and almost all your translations say this. Listen to this text. He who knew no sin became sin that we might become the righteousness of God. How about this translation? He who knew no sin became a sin offering that we might become the righteousness of God. Because the word katat can mean, depending on the context, either a sin that one commits or refer to a sin offering. So listen to this translation again. He who knew no sin became sin for us. And I've heard all kinds of commentary on how did he become a sinner? How did Yeshua the Messiah become a sinner? Because it says right there, he who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. And I'm saying, look, I think it's a Semitic way of speaking. Because katat, which means to miss the mark. Katat is an archery term. You aim at something, you miss the mark. Torah means to go the direction of the arrow. Go this way. It's another archery term. They're using bow and arrows. So he says, but a katat means you shot at the direction that you wanted to go, but it veered off. It missed the mark. So katat can mean a sin or a purification, because you touched death. Because death and sin are intertwined. The reason we have death is because of sin. But it's not a sin to become impure, because you're going to become impure walking this earth. So now listen to the translation again. He who knew no sin became a sin offering for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. That makes a world of difference in how you interpret that text. Okay, that's huge. All right, so the sin offering, or the purification. A young bull for the high priest, a male goat for any leader within the people, a female goat for the average common person, a dove or pigeon if you're poor, and a tenth of an ephah of fine flour if you're really, really poor. So it's interesting, when it becomes mandatory, the Torah gives you options for where you are on the social ladder. Now here's, by the way, we talked about this last week. Okay, so this particular one, is it mandatory or is it voluntary? If you become impure, or if you've committed a sin, it's required, it's mandatory. You don't have any option. It's not like you can say, well, I'm not sure if I want to go in there and do that or not. I'm thinking about it. No. It's not a think about it type of situation. It's now here's why I said, here's the interesting thing though. For both the katat and for the next offering, we'll talk about that one too. So the next one, what's the fifth? Asham. Yeah, the asham is, and you can only, for the asham offering, you can only bring a ram. You can only bring a ram. Interesting. This is mandatory atonement for unintentional sin. Okay? And you have to, and sometimes you have to make restitution.
Or intentional.
Or intentional. Well, we get to that in a moment.
Because you can't say it's all unintentional. Stealing is, you could have accidentally stolen something, but
you could accidentally steal something.
But it's not, most of the time stealing isn't accidental.
I agree. Most of the time it's not. But you could steal something accidentally.
You could.
You could be somewhere and accidentally.
But you can't really say that offering is only for unintentional.
It is only for unintentional. We'll talk about how it moves to intentional in just a moment. It is unintentional. The text never says it's for. And you're right, though. He's right that there are certain things that have to be intentional. But you could accidentally steal something, theoretically.
Well, yeah.
But most of the time, you're right that stealing is intentional when we think of stealing. But let's say that somebody's on the work site and they're gathering up their tools and they're putting all their tools into the box and they take something that belongs to the company. They didn't intend to. They take off with it. They put in their stuff. That's unintentional. However, if what we would call shoplifting, where you're, the 5-figure discount, where you're
Dine and dash.
By the way, I worked for security for a large corporation one time. And it's interesting, we had more issues with stealing from employees than we did from people on the outside.
Yep.
It was absolutely amazing, the kind of, and the ingenuity by which people stole. Incredible, yes.
Okay, so using your example then, it said, well, so let's say you're working on a job site, you're a construction guy, you're working on a job site, and you accidentally take a tool that isn't yours, not realizing you're just packing it up. The next day you come back and you bring that tool back. You go, hey, you know what? I walked off of this. I didn't realize it wasn't mine. Didn't mean to. Here's your tool back.
Right.
The Torah says you're supposed to give them 4 times that amount and then go and do an offering to the Lord as well.
I agree.
So should I bring 4 drills to the guy whose drill I accidentally took home?
You would probably have to do it in monetary. It would probably have to be monetary as opposed to
So I give him back his drill and then give him 4 times the amount of money for his drill because I accidentally walked off with it.
Yeah, it's still you still stole it.
Well, isn't that for an intent?
Semantics
No,
over
that's-
stolen versus
I couldn't have-
shoplifting versus unintentional and intentional.
No, because the text says shigagah, which is unintentional. Now, hold on just a second. Let's go back to this.
What's the word for unintentional?
Shigagah. Hebrew is shigagah, which means unintentional. That's how all the translations. So for both the asham, which is a ram, unintentional. For both and for the katat, unintentional. Now how? Wait just a second. So he's bringing up a great point. What happens if you do something that was not accidental but was intentional? How do you have a sacrifice for something that was intentional, but not with compound rebellion. As soon as you do it, there's remorse. As soon as you realize you've sinned, you go, oh, let me give you an example. Here's an example I used last time. And you're right that there are certain sins that you could not do by accident. Let me give you, here's a classic example. Here's the classic example in the Hebrew Scriptures. David sins with Bathsheba. And then he compounds that by putting his hand into the murder of Uriah, her husband. By the way, I love Matthew. The genealogy of Matthew says Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, wife of Uriah. It's like it never says, and the wife of David. So David commits adultery. All right, but here's the interesting thing: if you're going to follow Torah, you have to have witnesses. Well, you cannot compel anybody to testify against themselves. They can admit it to God, but there's no compelling of them to be in a court. Yeah, go ahead.
That's only for the punishment portion of it.
No. Well, yes.
I mean,
yes,
you don't bring the sacrifice to God for an impurity because somebody saw you impure. You do it because you know you're impure and you're supposed to do it.
To be sure, absolutely. But my point is that technically, adultery and murder are capital offenses.
Right.
So if we see you, if we have witnesses,
right.
Then
but that's the human level punishment.
Admittedly, absolutely. Now you know, David knows that he has committed a sin, and he confesses this sin. Okay, but so now humans can't really do anything to him because we don't have the ability to do anything to him. God can do something to him, and in fact,
He does.
In fact, one of the things that God can do in the Hebrew Scriptures is what's called karat, to cut you off. You can be cut off. What does that mean? And it's interesting because you cut a covenant. So if you cut a covenant, you can be cut off. And we find that there's 19 things in the Scriptures. I have to list it out here. I didn't send them to you, but 19 things that you can be cut off for. A number of different things. So, but what does it mean to be cut off? It means this, one of two things usually. Either the person is prematurely killed by God. God does the judgment. Since man can't do it, God says, I'll cut you off. Okay, God can prematurely take your life. Okay? Or you will not have descendants. Your descendants will be destroyed, and your line will be cut off. Okay? So it kind of stops. Okay? That's generally one of the two things that happens. Now,
neither of which happened to David.
not true. Not true. What happened to his first son, born to Bathsheba?
That wasn't his line cut off.
But it was one of his sons.
One of his sons.
And then look what happened to the rest of the line. It had problems. And Absalom was killed. Read the text. Absalom has problems, and all the other sons have problems. And eventually, most of them died prematurely. So there was karat in some of this. I mean, it happened. Now, it may not happen immediately, but over the time, they're cut off. And premature death. All right, so go back to our sin offering, our katat. What does it say? What kind of offering? You can put a tenth of an ephah of fine flour for the very poor. Okay? So if you're really poor, notice you don't have a blood sacrifice. You have a katat, a tenth of an ephah of fine flour. And I can give you all the text for this, but here's what I think happened. This is my pondering this, thinking about it, is that by confession of sin, an unintentional sin was mitigated to, an intentional sin was mitigated to unintentional in status by confession. And what happened then was, you would go to the altar and offer a sacrifice. And in fact, the ephah, we know that the very poor, they offer a tenth of an ephah of fine flour. And I'm working on some other things here on this. I think what happened is this: the person who has brought other offerings, the altar, your sacrifice was mixed with theirs, and it allowed you to be cleansed as well. The other offerings that people had offered mixed with yours allowed for there to be a remedy, so that a person who had committed a intentional could be moved to the status of unintentional by confession, if they confessed that sin. There was no resulting or compound rebellion. Then you could say, okay, your sacrifice will be mixed with others whose sins were unintentional, and their sacrifice will work towards you and be on your behalf. Okay? So I know that's difficult for us because we don't really think in these terms. Okay? So this is a tough thing. Yes.
Well, I think an element that we haven't really hit on yet is that it's not all about us. In other words, the sin that you do does not only affect you, but it affects the community.
Sure.
So,
absolutely.
So the reason for the purification or the blood scrubbing, if you will, it's on the altar.
Right.
It's so because when you sin, it's not all about the effect it has directly on you, it's the effect on the community. So that can grow to the point where you have to have the Yom Kippur and have the cleansing of everything. And then there's different levels of depending on the people that sin. You've got from the priests to the Levites to the Israelites to everybody else, and all of that together, can compound over time. And I think that's why there's more to it than
there's a lot to this
that we can understand.
Oh, it's extremely intricate. Absolutely. So I want to make this. I sent you this yesterday. This is the Torah commands regarding blood. This is huge. According to Genesis 9:4, we have this: only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Okay, so blood was considered a life fluid, and for that reason, as Jacob Milgrom puts it, blood is a ritual detergent. That's his term. I like the term. I think it's, in other words, what cleanses is blood because blood represents life. So he says this in Leviticus 3 that we looked at last week: it is a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwellings. I mean, that's about as nailing it down as about as thoroughly as you can. Perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwellings: you shall not eat any fat or blood. Now, the fat that he's referring to is the fat that's on the entrails, on the outside of the entrails, that encases the internal organs, not the fat marbled in. You can't hardly get that out. But you can cut the fat layer around the entrails of the animal, or any blood. Then our text today says, and you are not to eat any blood, either of bird or animal, in all of your dwellings. So then, I'm going to skip down. Leviticus 17:14. It says this: for as the life of all flesh is its blood, is identified with its life. Therefore I said to the sons of Israel, you are not to eat the blood of any flesh, for the life of the flesh is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off. Okay? So, and he goes on in Deuteronomy, a couple of references to Deuteronomy saying, do not drink the blood, eat the blood, participate in anything that, if you're gonna slaughter an animal, by the way, whether you slaughter the animal for sacrifice or whether you slaughter the animal to eat outside the temple, you have to drain the blood, because the blood is a life fluid and it's to be used on the altar. Yeah.
So where do you think it stands as far as like the Jehovah's Witnesses who say you shouldn't have a blood transfusion?
Yeah, I know these are tough issues. These are the kind of halakhic issues that you get with the rabbis with debate and all that. I go this route. this is me personally. Life trumps. Kuach nefesh, that is the sake of life. The person is not drinking animal blood, and these texts specifically refer to animal blood. So if blood is being infused into your veins because you've had a hemorrhage or surgery or something like that, I would tend towards life and say, if it's giving you life, then at that point you need to do so. You're not drinking it, first of all.
Well, so
But
much
you
of
do.
that is a polemic against the paganism as well. because
Yes, to be sure.
They would drink the
Right,
blood.
yeah, there are groups that would
They
do
would drink
this.
the blood of their enemy.
Right.
You know, when you cough.
Well, so in my own family, had my wife not had a blood transfusion of 2 units, she would be anemic and would have difficulty. So she had 2 whole units infused, what do they call transfusion. So for surgeries, for a lot of situations, it's needed. Now, I would say these texts are dealing with animals, so it's not even addressing the issue of the idea of taking human blood, and obviously they didn't have that capacity back then. So we are now dealing with medical issues that, on the specifics, obviously the Torah doesn't focus on because they just didn't have the capacity. I look at the overall principle of what's called the kuach nefesh, which means for the sake of life, for the preservation of life. If I can move a person towards preservation of life, I don't have personally a problem with a blood transfusion. Yes.
In the text, they're particularly talking about eating, consuming blood.
Right.
That's a whole other thing, particularly talking about consumption of that blood.
Right, and I think in the context, obviously the context we're dealing with here is animal blood that you're going to either put on the altar or you're going to eat for your own health purposes. But in that instance, the blood has to be drained and put into the ground. So blood transfusions is one of those.
Well, because even outside of Jehovah's Witnesses, you have cultures today where,
Yes.
I think it's the Chinese, they eat the placenta.
Yes.
Ugh.
Now that I would see, to me, that moves in the direction of cannibalism, which I think is problematic, and I would have problems with that.
Now you're telling me.
So
Yeah, you just don't eat anybody's or anything's innards.
I would think that would be. And by the way, we find out as we study a little further in this that there are certain parts of the entrails of animals that one is not to participate in. And I think this goes back to the issue Corey raised earlier, which is that certain of these entrails were used for the purposes of omens and for divination. The kidneys were used. In fact, they mentioned that.
Not to mention, it's just not very healthy to eat a filter or the fat surrounding the entrails, since they happen
Part
to
that
be the
sticks off
most
the liver, that's
toxic
specifically
part
used.
of the body.
Yeah, but I want to make this, because we're going to come to this in Leviticus 11 in a few weeks, or actually maybe next week or week after. I did say it this way: I think that there might be, although the rabbis say the dietary is one of those that we're not exactly sure why all the reasons. Now, there are many of my Christian brothers and many of my Messianic brothers who want to say, well, the reason why God gives us Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14 is because of health. And I'm going to make this statement.
It's obedience.
It's obedience, first of all, and it's holiness. The first and foremost, it's holiness. And I've said it this way.
That's what Scripture says.
That's what Scripture says. Be ye, at the end of Leviticus 11, 44, 45, be ye holy, even as I am holy. So there are certain things you eat, certain things you don't. Okay, so it's this division and separation. That's the issue. So I've said it this way: He doesn't call us to be, in this instance, healthy. He calls us to be holy. Now, we should eat healthy as well. Okay? We should eat healthy as well. I'm not against that. But my point is that if I hear, because
I wasn't arguing.
No,
that
I know
it was
you're not.
only. It was, but
No, I know
think
you're not.
He's probably smart enough to know how to do it for both purposes.
I agree, but he doesn't spell that out for us. In the sense of saying, and by the way, there's certain things one can eat that are not on the list or off the list that you could probably say, there's some health to it, and you could probably make a case for the healthiness of it.
Brent?
But I would say, don't eat it, because he just says, don't eat it. Yes.
it is obedient, and the obedient creates health, because we're told that if we do these things, the diseases of the Egyptians will not come upon us.
Right. So I think there's, yeah, but I don't want to focus on the health aspect of it for my Messianic
No.
brothers and sisters, or for the.
No, but it's a side benefit.
It's a side benefit, yeah. If it's there, it's a side benefit. But the text itself is saying, be holy, obey this because I'm holy. And so you separate and divide. So I'm trying to say I want to place the emphasis where I think the text is placing the emphasis, not on just saying, well, this is all a big health thing. Because now we've got some Christians who are saying, I'm willing to eat Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14 because it's healthy. And I'm saying, well, that's great that you're doing it for health, but the real reason you need to do it is because it's what God said, not just because it might be healthy. So
Yeah,
to
it's
set
not,
you apart, it's to, these are the reasons it's given. All right, any other questions or comments? I've ran along on this, and I wanted to go ahead.
Yeah, one thing about being cut off, that did not necessarily go away with the quote-unquote Old Testament.
I agree.
Paul told the Corinthians that regarding the man that knew his father's wife, to put him out of the congregation, that Satan would destroy the body,
Yes.
but his spirit would be raised in the last day.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll give you another example. The instances, I've mentioned this before, the instances in the Hebrew Scriptures, and I would argue in the Apostolic, I'll give you one example in the Apostolic, where a person is killed immediately for a violation is when a person has touched or violated sancta. That is, when they have messed with something that belongs to the tabernacle or the temple.
Ananias and Sapphira.
I'll give you an example. Give you a couple examples. Nadab and Abihu, we're going to see in Leviticus 10, they go into the holy place and they offer strange fire. It says fire comes out from the holy place and consumes them like that. Uzzah touches the ark, which is dedicated to the temple. Can't touch this. Only certain people can touch this. Uzzah touches the ark in a very, trying to do the right thing.
He's trying to keep it.
He's trying to keep it from falling off the ark, off the cart. It should never have been on the cart to begin with. The Levites should have been carrying it. They can touch it with the poles. He reaches out, touches the ark,
Boom.
boom. David's like, God, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to do a good thing here. God says to David, hey David, get back to the Torah. What does it say? David's like, oh, Levi's got to carry this thing. All right. Okay.
Holy space. as
Holy
well.
space.
Kings going in.
Yes, the king who goes into there was a king who goes into the most holy place. And the priest tell him, get out of here. You're not supposed to be in here. You have no right here, but I'm the king. He says, all of a sudden he gets zera'ah all over his body. It starts to just cover him. They're like, get out of here now. Okay? And then he eventually dies. I mean, on and on this goes. By the way, here's another one. Now for the New Testament people. So that we give equal time. The response, the